Now that we've talked about the formal sell-side process and the right things to do, I want to spend a little bit of time on the wrong things to do. One of the biggest mistakes that I see sellers make is negotiating with one buyer. And that's wrong for a variety of reasons. First off, as we know, if you've got one buyer, there's no competition. So the buyer has no reason to act, because it's usually loss aversion that makes people act. So the buyer has no reason to act. You've ceded control of the process to the buyer. If you're only negotiating with one buyer, the buyer now is negotiating process as well as substance, and the buyer is controlling that process. So you're ceding leverage to the buyer. I think another one that folks often don't think about, though, is the failure to get price discovery. Competition clearly pushes up the value of an asset, but when you negotiate with one buyer and you consummate a transaction, after the deal's done, can you really look back and say, I did the best for myself? If you brought in no other buyers, knowing that valuation is subjective, right? It is arrived at the bargaining table. There's no price tag on a business. So if you negotiate with only one buyer and then find yourself in a position where you closed a transaction and brought no other acquirers in, you never got price discovery. And it's one of the biggest regrets that I hear from people after having sold a business, negotiating with the private equity firm that just called them up out of the blue and said, we're the best buyer and we'll pay you the most, is, did I really do the right thing? And those sellers over time want to somewhat close their ears to the transaction multiples they hear that others are getting because their deal is already done. But again, if you want to do the best thing for yourself, at bare minimum, if you don't run a formal process, if you ignore everything else that I say, bring competition into the mix. That's number one. Another big mistake sellers make is going into this without a plan, right? If you're going to sell your business, you need to spend time up front, hire experts, figure out what some reasonable expectations are, because, pain really comes from that gap between expectations and reality. If you walk into this with expectations that are far above what you're ultimately going to get, it will be a painful process for you. So formulate a plan before you wade into the market. Set your reasonable expectations. Build competition for your business. Use time and deadlines as leverage. Ferret out information on the other side that helps you understand the disparity of desire. Conceal information that potentially exerts negative leverage on you. Build credibility over time, doing what you said you would do, and properly giving positive and negative feedback to the other side. If you can do these things, all else being equal, I promise you, you will raise the value of your business. The biggest mistake that you can make as a seller is negotiating directly with one buyer. When you negotiate directly with one buyer, you're effectively ceding the process or control of the process to the buyer. The buyer's setting the rules. The buyer has no reason to act. In absence of competition, the buyer has no reason to do anything at all, so they can drag you out. And I think sometimes most importantly, what people don't think about is that if you don't run a formal process and bring in competition, you'll never really know how much money you left on the table. Now, certainly there are instances where you can negotiate with one buyer, get a blockbuster deal, and would not have done better elsewhere. But I find that happens in the extreme minority of cases. Remember, the value of a business is not, there's no price tag on a business. It's arrived at the bargaining table. Value is subjective. It's a matter of bringing in a wide diversity of acquirers and having them bid competitively to acquire your business.